Angelicus and Questions here. Sperb.
Hello, and welcome to Sperb Herbs, episode 21. I can't believe I've done 21 of these already. And today we're going to be talking about Si Wu Tang, or Si Wu Tang, four-substance decoction. This is definitely one of the classic formulas of Chinese medicine, super important in Chinese medicine. And so we're going to be getting into that. But of course, first we're going to do something a little different. But before we get into all that, let's talk about our sponsors. If you are an acupuncturist, this podcast, as well as others, are approved for California Acupuncture Board continuing education units and National Certification Commission of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine professional development activities at a reasonable cost. Check out www.integrative medicine council, that's council with COUNCIL.org, for more information. I have also written a couple of books. First is Integrative Pharmacology, combining modern pharmacology with integrative medicine. And that is quite a big textbook. And the other one is Playing the Game, a step-by-step guide to accepting insurance as an acupuncturist. I did that with my co-author, Tiffany Hefner. Both of these are available at the shop on www.spurbsherbs.com. So if either of those are interesting to you, please check them out. All right, so today we have a lot to cover in not so long a time. So I'm gonna go through this pretty quick. So, I was so excited. I've been teasing it. I was excited to finally, after all these episodes, to do my deep dive into qi. What is qi? That's something we talk about, something that's paramount to Chinese medicine. We haven't really defined it and gone into it yet. So I'm really excited about getting into that. But before I started doing that, I thought I would take a few slides to discuss skeptics of the concept of qi. Then a few slides became more slides, and a look at what is skepticism and that whole philosophy, and then down the rabbit hole I went. So instead of a deep dive on qi, we're going to have a discussion of skepticism. But don't worry, we'll get to qi. Maybe that will make a good topic on episode 25. That's only 4 episodes away. We'll see what happens. Might make a good quaternary episode. So skeptics of qi believe that the belief of qi demonstrates the mystical, non-reasonable basis of Chinese medicine and therefore proves it is all nonsense. At its heart, I believe this position is very non-scientific. However, before we get into that, let's talk about what skepticism is. Skepticism basically says that one lacks knowledge. This can be local skepticism, where one can be skeptical about certain areas of knowledge, or radical skepticism says one cannot know anything. We don't know anything in the universe. Another breakdown can be from the method of skepticism. Descartes, of course, a very famous philosopher, named another branch Cartesian skepticism that says any proposed knowledge claim can be doubted. So it doesn't matter what you say, you can doubt it. Rather than focusing on doubting knowledge, Agrippan skepticism says that there's no way to justify knowledge in and of itself. So these are big philosophical approaches to this, which probably aren't going to be too helpful, but it gives us a little bit of a background on what skepticism is. And of course, this is just the 2-cent overview of it. There's whole semesters of skepticism, skeptical thought. So this is just scratching the very surface. There are some interesting thought experiments to demonstrate skepticism. One of those is called the brain in a vat hypothesis, which supposes that one might be a disembodied brain kept alive in a vat and fed false sensory signals. Since a brain in a vat would have no way of knowing that it was a brain in a vat, one cannot prove that it is not a brain in a vat. In other words, this hypothesis says we're all brains in vats and we just don't know it. The matrix hypothesis, which has become very popular, Elon Musk just has proposed, says he believes in this. The matrix hypothesis suggests that everyone or even the entire universe might be inside a computer simulation or virtual reality. In other words, we don't exist at all. We're part of a simulation. And my favorite is actually from Zhuangzi, who is a very famous Chinese disciple of Lao Tzu, of Taoist origins. And he had the dream argument states that reality is indistinguishable from a dream. He's very famously said, "Last night I dreamt I was a butterfly. This morning I wasn't sure if I was a butterfly dreaming I was a man." So very interesting quotes. That's the dream argument. So there's lots of these thought experiments that are all under the skepticism rubric. So scientific skepticism, also called rational skepticism, involves the application of skeptical philosophy, critical thinking skills, and knowledge of science and its methods to empirical claims. They believe that empirical investigation of reality leads to the most reliable knowledge. The use of the scientific method is best suited for determining and verifying results. And then there's a subset of scientific skeptics that employ debunking to expose or discredit false claims. This is often applied to UFOs, paranormal, cryptozoology, things like Bigfoot and Yeti, and alternative medicine. An interesting aspect of this is that often phenomena that have been debunked stay popular. This is attributed to the human social need, be they psychological, cognitive, or instinctive. Maybe it could also be because they weren't truly debunked. So pseudo-skeptics come into play here. Scientific skepticism has its place, and I think it's very important as it strives to protect individuals from scams, harm, and danger. So I'm definitely not a fan. I definitely am a fan of scientific skepticism. The problem becomes when scientific skeptics become pseudo-skeptics or false skeptics. Wilson in 2008 describes this as the skeptic of the bogus variety cherry picks evidence on the basis of a pre-existing belief, seizing on data, however tenuous, that supports his position, and yet declaring himself skeptical of any evidence, however compelling, that undermines it. So in other words, they're cherry picking, they're choosing what evidence to look at rather than looking at the whole of the evidence. So acupuncture and skeptics. James Randi, a magician, became an amazing debunker and offered $1 million to any evidence of paranormal activity. After decades, no one has claimed this offer. They've now pulled it. He passed a few years ago, and they pulled that offer. But he used to set up, seances as a magician and everything. So this was part of his thing, and he said it was all just magic and crap, and he put his money where his mouth is, and no one claimed it. He founded one of the best-known skeptical foundations, the James Randi Educational Foundation. I love a lot of what they do, but they do have a lot of this pseudo-skepticism that we just mentioned. They have a whole lecture on acupuncture, which is absolute crap. So let's look at what it says. In this lecture, Hall states the following are not true, and I follow that up with my own comments. So one, it is not an ancient Chinese treatment method. There are thousands of years of evidence saying it is. Hall states it may have originated in Greece. Who cares? Clearly, the Chinese and other Asian cultures refined it, and there is no clear evidence of Grecian use. So it's just a strange point to make, that anti-acupuncture. I don't understand it at all. Point number two, it does not involve sticking needles in acupoints. Hall states many acupuncture methods don't use needles. Again, who cares? Chinese medicine has many modalities in addition to acupuncture, which specifically refers to insertion of needles. So just because it doesn't always involve needles doesn't mean it's false. I mean, that's just really a strange point to make. Three, it's not widely used in China. Where's she getting this stuff? Of course it is widely used in China. Yes, its popularity waxes and wanes, but every hospital in China employs acupuncturists. It's very widespread. I don't understand where she gets this stuff. So where is she getting this knowledge from? Pseudo-skepticism. She read something, found something, and clombed onto it, even if it's not true. So point number four, it does not work to relieve pain and nausea. And this is that pseudo-skeptical only seeing evidence they want to see. While we are still early in the evidence gathering stage, there are many studies that show efficacy and many that do not. I think the preponderance of evidence is positive, but I readily concede a lot more evidence needs to be done. This is the true scientist's position. We do not know for sure and are investigating it. The pseudo-skeptic's position is to cherry pick early or poorly constructed trials and draw a definitive conclusion before the evidence is anywhere near complete. So I think there's evidence to say that it relieves pain and nausea. It's an argumentable thing, but I don't think you can say it doesn't. It's just strange. It's cherry picked. Point number 5, it does not work for other conditions like infertility. And my point to this is pretty much the same as the last point. I think the evidence is fairly positive, but it's still early to draw any conclusion. So I'm okay that it might not work for infertility, but I wouldn't go so far as to say it doesn't work for infertility right now. Number 6, it cannot be used for surgical anesthesia. I actually do agree. This one I totally agree with. But it isn't the fault of acupuncturists. The original story was by a journalist who did not write that the person was also given anesthetics. So this is where acupuncture became really popular in the West, was it showed someone getting brain surgery, and it was told that it was just using anesthesia from acupuncture points. And that's not the truth. They were actually using anesthesia, and then acupuncture was supplementing that anesthesia. So I, as an acupuncturist, would not feel comfortable having surgery with just acupuncture points. So I'm okay with this. As a point, I don't think it invalidates acupuncture in toto just because this one point isn't true. 7, it is not harmless. There are side effects. And again, I agree with this. There are side effects. I see bruising and bleeding, and I've read stories. I've been involved in cases, legal cases of punctures. I mean, it's not harmless. So I agree with this. It pierces the skin, and therefore there is potential harm, just like every other medical intervention. There is not a medical intervention that does not have harm or side effects. Risk versus benefit must be weighed. Having said this, almost all the harm I have seen in the literature has been from non-acupuncturists employing acupuncture, and it is incredibly rare. Almost any medical intervention has higher rates of harm than acupuncture. So I agree, it's not harmless. There is a risk to it, but that risk is really small compared to almost any other medical intervention, in my opinion. And I can back that up with some science if you give me some time. So I'm a little bit concerned about this as a point as well. 8, it has not been validated by scientific research. Again, I think there's a lot of positive evidence, though we are still in the early stages of research. I would add that most medical interventions have not been empirically researched either. When I was in medical school, the number I was given was only about 10% of medical interventions have been substantiated by research. That was a while ago. It's been 20 years, about 20 years. So I am sure a lot more has been, but still, even if a lot more has been, we're still nowhere near a majority of medical interventions have actually been empirically, scientifically researched. Basically, acupuncture skeptics are clearly in the realm of pseudo-skeptics. They're cherry-picking the evidence that they want to do. And they have a lot of pull, but man, they're angry. And when I look at the evidence they do, it's just like, it's like 20 years old. I'm like, wait, try looking at any of the 10,000 things that have happened since 20 years ago. So anyways. So science is based on the idea of what is possible, and then through the use of scientific method and usually a slow stepwise process to build evidence to show the theory is probable. We cannot prove, we can only make things probable. I think the question here is about possibility. If something isn't possible, we should not waste our resources pursuing scientific investigation. I might think that I can create tomatoes from my armpit, but there's no possible demonstration of that, and therefore no scientist should waste their time on such a ludicrous belief. There are several qualities that are important in the pursuit of science. The first of these is curiosity, followed by intelligence, reason, and I would say skepticism mixed with a sense of wonder in no particular order. This last is what I call being an open-minded skeptic. I am an open-minded skeptic. I am skeptical, but I'm open. I'm sure there are many other important attributes to this. This is my list. I'm sure there's some formal list that I didn't come across. Here's the thing. The best scientists see something interesting, different, that few others see, and then pursue the science of it. Skeptics, or actually pseudo-skeptics, see something interesting and different and jump to the conclusion that it is not possible and try to stop scientific inquiry. That is the key. They're stopping inquiry. They're not taking the inquiry that's already happened and applying it appropriately. They're saying there's no more inquiry should be done. And that's the problem. These are the people who are not scientific. And I find that the most vocal of skeptics are in this category, especially of acupuncture. They harp on any little weakness of what they are examining and explode it up into a complete denial of the phenomenon. And then they solidify their position and diminish and castigate any new supportive evidence. So if something new comes out that is positive, they go, well, no, that's wrong. That can't be wrong. That can't be right. It's just ridiculous. As an acupuncturist, I see the evidence of what I do for individual patients. However, as a scientist, I do want scientific inquiry. There is a thought that something isn't shown to have cause and effect until we understand the mechanism of action of a particular phenomena. We're piecing this together in acupuncture, but we do not have what I call the unified field theory of acupuncture. We don't know exactly how that happens. There was a new study that just came out this week that adds some evidence. It says there's some cells that are particularly, I still haven't read the whole thing, but I'm excited to read it. The bottom line is there's a lot more research to do, but there's more than a possibility of effectiveness of acupuncture. And scientists should be looking at the how, not offhandedly dismissing its effectiveness. And that is my little diatribe on skeptics. Let's get into our formula today. It's Si Wu Tang. English translation of this is 4-substance decoction, and that refers to the 4 herbs that are in here. So there are 4 ingredients. Wang Zijie, as translated in Shide, emphasizes et al. It emphasizes that it is the effect of the sum of the 4 herbs rather than the individual herbs themselves in this 4-substance decoction. He says this formula is 4 similar substances that possess one nature and achieve one function. They move together without impeding each other. I just want to take a moment because often with Chinese formulas, we are doing things like using opposite herbs. So we'll do something that warms and something that cools. And the idea is the body can use whichever herb it needs to regulate, or sometimes we do those opposites to protect it from overwarming or overcooling. And so they're designed to be used in sort of opposite ways, regulatory ways. This formula isn't one of those. This is a very interesting formula. It is, it's something that I call a pushy formula. It pushes in one direction as opposed to letting the body kind of decide which way it wants to go. And it's very effective at that. And so that's what this is talking about. Other names for this formula include 4-component decoction, 4 herbs decoction, all very similar. Dongui 4 combination. Dongui is one of the herbs in here. Romania decoction. So why would one call it Dongui? Why would one call it Romania? And then that, by the way, is Di Sui Tang in Chinese. And another one is Major Chuangshang decoction, or Da Chuangshang Tang. And these are all 3 different herbs in this formula. So why can't they even agree on which herb it should be called under? And that's an interesting one because there's some debate as to what are the chief herbs in this formula. And so that's why you might have different perspectives on this. And it's old and it's widely used and it's been researched and written about by a lot of Chinese practitioners. And so there's just a ton of information, different perspectives. So that's where some of this comes out of. This formula is in the tonified blood category of formulas, and that's really what it does. It tonifies blood. The traditional administration of this formula is to coarsely grind equal amounts of the herbs and take 9 grams as a draft before a meal. So a draft is, just suck it down and mix it with, you can either mix it with some hot water, is usually how a draft is done. You mix it with hot water and drink it. So kind of as a tea, but not steeped necessarily. So you can also take the ground herbs directly and wash it down. But today it's usually prepared as a decoction, which is a water extraction basically of the herbs. Scheid et al. Says the actions of this formula are to tonify the blood and regulate the liver. So the liver is important for blood, and regulation means moving the liver, making sure that it's doing its job, moving properly. Chen and Chen says it nourishes the blood and regulates blood circulation, so it keeps it much more in the blood. And so they both agree that it tonifies and nourishes the blood. And they both agree that it regulates, it moves. Scheid is saying it moves the liver, regulates the liver, and Chen says it regulates blood circulation. I think both of those can be true. The liver is in charge of movement and of qi and blood, so it makes a little bit of sense. I think Chen keeps it in the realm of blood and is probably just a touch more in line with what I think is going on with this formula. So while tonifying the blood and nourishing the blood are the same, regulating the liver and regulating blood circulation are not necessarily equivalent. They're similar, but not equivalent. Regulating the liver refers mostly to moving the liver qi, and while that may in turn move blood, in and of itself does not. Regulating blood circulation implies the emphasis is on moving blood rather than on qi. So what are the Chinese medical indications for this? This formula has numerous indications, including dizziness, blurred vision. Whenever I'm giving a list like this, these are sort of the manifestations, but we still need to do the underlying Chinese medical diagnosis for these things. So it doesn't work on every case of dizziness. It works on cases of dizziness that are due to blood deficiency. So just keep that in mind as we go through these indications. So dizziness, blurred vision, insomnia, palpitations, which is awareness of your heartbeat, and especially many obstetric, gynecological, and menstrual complaints such as pain, dysmenorrhea, which is painful menses, amenorrhea, which is lack of menses, vaginal discharge, infertility, endometriosis, which is uterine tissues where it shouldn't be and very painful, ectopic pregnancy, that's pregnancy outside of the uterus, breech presentation where the baby is upside down before birth, or just not in proper position, and various postpartum conditions. Chen say it is useful for general blood deficiency, deficiency and injury of the Chong and Ren channels in gestational and postpartum disorder. So we haven't talked about the Chong and the Ren channels. At some point we will. Those are both considered part of the 8 extra meridians. So we have 12 meridians that are on each side that are paired with organs in the body, and then we have 8 extra meridians. The Ren meridian actually is on the front, the center line of the front, and the Chong is translated often as the penetrating vessel, and that's a very different thing, very much involved with menstruation and pregnancy and things along those lines. At some point, we'll get into the 8 extras and talk about them. So according to Scheid, this formula was first mentioned in Secret Formulas to Manage Trauma and Reconnect Fractures from an Immortal, written in 846 CE. However, Chen says it was first mentioned in the Imperial Grace Formulary of the Taiping area, or the Taiping Hui Min He Ji Ju Fang, in 1078 to 85 CE. So almost 330 years later than what Scheid says. What's interesting is Scheid actually refers to this book that Chen says, and says that was actually when it kind of refined the use of this formula. So it's interesting that they some of this and the differences. Usually they're pretty on track with each other, but sometimes there's a discrepancy, and I think there's some interesting aspects in looking at the discrepancy. And also remember, they were written 6 years apart, so research on the history of this stuff has occurred, and so that might be why there may be some more clarity in Scheid sometimes than Chen. So it has, as we mentioned, 4 ingredients. The first one is Rehmannia radix preparata, or Shu Di Wang, and this should have, in a decoction, it should be 9 to 12 grams dosing. And this formula this herb is in the herbs that tonify the blood category. What we're going to find is 3 of these 4 herbs are going to be actually in this category, the herbs that tonify the blood category. Chen state that this is the chief herb, while Scheid says the hierarchy of the herbs changed based on the pattern treated, though they do kind of land on Rehmannia or Dongui, which we're going to talk about next, I believe, is as usually as chief herbs, but not always. It depends on what you're trying to do. It tonifies the blood, nourishes the yin, and tonifies the essence, according to Bensky et al. In 2004. The second herb is Peony radix alba, or Bai Xiao, 9 to 12 grams again. And again, as I mentioned, this is one of the herbs that's in the tonify the blood category. Bai Shao is very important. These are all very important herbs, all of them. Nourishes the blood, regulates menses, calms and curbs liver yang, preserves yin, adjusts the nutritive and protective levels. So this is the yin and the wei levels. We'll get into levels at some point. So don't get, if you're not into it, if you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. And alleviates pain. Bai Shao is very good at alleviating pain. Angelica sinensis radix dong gui, which is, again, very important herb, 9 to 12 grams. And again, this is in the herbs that tonify the blood category. Bensky et al. Says it nourishes the blood, but its spicy and warm nature focuses the formula on moving the qi and blood and not merely nourishing the yin. It also disperses cold, invigorates and harmonizes the blood, regulates menses, treats cough, and moistens the intestines and unblocks the bowels. This is considered a moistening herb. So finally, our fourth herb is Chuanshan rhizoma, Chuanshan. And this should be used at 3 to 6 grams in a decoction. And this is the herb that's different than the others. This herb is in the herbs that invigorate the blood category, which means moving the blood. So rather than building blood, this is more about moving blood. Bensky says this herb invigorates the blood, promotes the movement of qi, expels wind, and alleviates pain. Again, very useful herb. All of the herbs in this formula enter the blood, but they are divided into 2 groups. This is commentary on this. The first group are the blood and the blood herbs that are entirely yin in nature. So blood is considered yin in nature, and part of if you look on a kind of scale of things, if you look at a scale, we have on one side we have blood, and as that gets worse and worse, it goes to yin, or yin encourages blood, but they're connected, and then qi and yang are connected on the other side of it. So this is blood and the blood herbs that are entirely yin in nature and only nourish the blood. These 2 include Romania radix preparata, Shudi Huang, which nourishes the yin of the blood, and Peony radix alba Bai Shao tonifies the blood and preserves the yin. Because these 2 herbs are rich, cloying, and astringent in nature, there's a risk that their use will lead to blood stasis. Anything that's rich and cloying stops things. So anything too tonifying generally will clog things up, according to Chinese medicine. This is prevented, though, by the second group of herbs treating the qi in the blood. Angelica sinensis radix dong gui tonifies and invigorates the blood. Translated by Scheid et al., the collected treatise of Zhang Jingyue says, it moves as it tonifies, and it tonifies as it moves. It truly is the qi herb within the blood. So there's movement there. And remember, that is part of the herbs that tonify blood category. Now we have Chuanshan, which is herbs that invigorate the blood. So Chuanshan rhizoma, Chuanshan nourishes the blood and promotes the movement of qi. And the quote here is by Scheid as well. Facilitating the flow of blood through the vessels and collaterals, it releases constraint, opens knotting, and alleviates pain. So it's moving. So what we have are 2 herbs that are very tonifying to blood, and we have 2 herbs that tonify blood but more move the blood, so that too much tonification isn't going to make the blood stagnate and stop, and that's the important part here. Overall, the formula thus regulates the blood by providing both tonification and movement. So continuing with the commentary, this formula is a variation of ass-hide gelatin and mugwort decoction, or Jiao Ai Tang, from Essentials from the Golden Cabinet. So Essentials from the Golden Cabinet is, along with Shanghan Lung, they were all one book. Shanghan Lung is on cold damage. These were actually one book together, written by Zhang Jing, and are considered, at this point, they're the oldest existing formula books around. So this means it goes, this formula, ass-hide gelatin and mugwort decoction, goes all the way back to the very first herbal formulas. And you're seeing acid gelatin. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about donkey glue is basically what we're talking about. And that's considered a very strong blood tonic. Using this formula for gynecological disorders was first mentioned in the Formulary of the Pharmacy Service for benefiting the people in the Taiping era. So that's what Chen was referring to as the first mention of the Si Wu Tang formula, but Scheid says it actually was mentioned earlier than that. Patterns of blood deficiency for this formula will invariably show signs of dryness because essence is lacking. A common way to modify the formula consists of varying the relative dosage of the ingredients. So depending on what you emphasize, can modify how the formula actually works. Some authors use Rehmannia radix Sheng Di Huang instead of Rehmannia radix preparata or Shu Di Huang. So Shen Di Huang tends to be a little bit cooler than the Shu Di Huang. And sometimes they use they will substitute Peony radix rubra or Chirshao instead of Peony radix alba or Baishao. So that's red versus white peony. The red peony is a little bit more drying than the white is, and a little bit more moving. So it kind of depends. Like I said, this formula has been around for at least 1,200 years at this point, and very, very popular. So lots of variations have happened, lots of thoughts on this stuff. So just different ways that this formula can be used. So the Qing dynasty physician Zhang Lu, in discussing the remainders of the discussion of cold damage, says, according to Scheid, this is translated by Scheid, four-substance decoction is a special formula for treating patterns where the yin blood has become ill. It is, however, not a formula for regulating and tonifying the true yin. Hence, when a considerable number of formularies state that the four-substance decoction tonifies the yin, this is interpreted by later generations of physicians as licensing the treatment of yin deficiency manifesting with heat, the upflaring of fire with bleeding, and similar patterns, then this is ignorant practice whose harm continues to the present day. With regard to its specific usage in gynecology, it is common practice to casually add herbs that treat wind, food stagnation, phlegm, or qi, so that today use of the original four-substance decoction has become all confused and disorderly. Among all of these later physicians who would like their modifications to become accepted standards, there are hardly any worth using. So this gentleman clearly is on the things, let's not modify it too much. So that's from Zhang Lu. Chen, still in the commentary, Chen says this condition can be caused by chronic illness, vacuity, excessive sexual activity, and excessive consumption of aromatic herbs. They also explain why Chai Hu, Bupluri radix, and Jurshur, Aurantia fructus immaturis, both commonly used for liver qi constraint, are not used in this formula. Both are drying herbs that would further damage the yin in these cases. Chen discusses this formula in terms of the four seasons: genesis or spring, growth or summer, harvest autumn, and storing winter. Each of the herbs in this formula are then associated with one of the seasons: Dongui with spring, Chuangshang with summer, Baishao with autumn, and Shu Di Huang with winter. Modifications. Lots of modifications are possible according to the text, as we just read from Zhang Lu. Heading Artemisia argi folium, Aya, and Acini coricola or jiao, that's that acid glue that we were talking about earlier, treats restless fetus disorder with continual vaginal bleeding. So I'm going to be honest with you, if there's continual vaginal bleeding, maybe you should go to the hospital and have it looked at. But if that doesn't do anything, then we can treat it with some herbs. Substituting Rehmannia radix or Shen Di Huang, fresh Rehmannia, for Rehmannia radix preparata or Shu Di Huang, and add Scutellaria radix, Huang Qin, and Mouton cortex, Mudon Pi for signs of heat. So all those herbs that are being in there are herbs that help dissipate heat. So Shen Di Huang is going to be cooler than Shu Di Huang. Huangqin is one of the three yellows, which is very good for cooling heat and damp heat especially. And the Mouton Cortex Mouton P is specifically very good for cooling the blood. So all of that would be very helpful. Substitute Peony radix rubra Chirshao for Peony radix alba Baishao, and add Persica semen Daoren, that is peach pit, and Carthami floss Honghua or safflower to treat a predominance of blood stasis. So both Honghua and Daoren are very moving for the blood. As I mentioned, Chirshao is a little bit more moving than Baishao is, so this would all be very much moving. If there's still some deficiency of blood, but there's more of a stasis of blood, it's not moving properly. You can add ginseng radix Renshen and astragalus radix Huangqi to treat qi deficiency. Both of those are very strong qi tonifiers. You can add Cinnamomum cortex Rogui and Evodia fructus Wujuyu for blood deficiency with internal cold. And yes, Rogui, which is cinnamon, that is cinnamon, like the cinnamon cortex. So it's like the herb, the kitchen herb, is very warming according to Chinese medicine. And Evodia fructus is actually another kitchen herb. I'm totally blanking. I can picture it. I'm blanking on what it'll come to me. It's used a lot in Indian cooking, and that is very warming as well. Fructus Evodia fructus is totally blanking on it. It's not star anise. God, it's clove. It's clove. There we go. I knew I'd get it. Clove. I'm getting old. What can I say? Other formulas. The one I don't mention here that I always like to mention is Bajin Tang, which is a combination of Si Wu Tang and Si Tang, or the Four Gentlemen decoction, which is sort of the classic qi building formula. So with Bajin Tang, you have the blood building of the Si Wu Tang and the qi building of Si Tang, and together they're very strong for building qi and blood. So that's a common formula that I will use, especially gynecologically. So that's a good other formula. We're going to talk about two other formulas right now. Dongui decoction to tonify the blood, or Dongui Bushui Tang, Bushui Tang, and restore the spleen decoction Gui Pi Tang, along with Si Wu Tang, are all used to tonify the blood and treat heavy menstruation or blood deficiency resulting from heavy menstruation. Both Dongui decoction to tonify the blood and restore the spleen decoction do this by tonifying the qi in order to tonify the blood. In other words, they improve the assimilation functions of the spleen and stomach in order to facilitate the production of blood. So this is, again, very classic and deep Chinese theory, which is that we actually, when we eat, the spleen and stomach separate. And when we say spleen, we probably mean spleen and pancreas, because spleen in and of itself doesn't have any digestive functions. But I can get into this at some point. But I believe when the Chinese say spleen, I mean the complex of spleen and pancreas. The pancreas sits right underneath the spleen, and the Chinese actually talk about the tail of the spleen, which the spleen doesn't have a tail, but the pancreas would in anatomy. So pancreas. So spleen and stomach is what is digestive, and so when we eat food, we break it down so that we can actually use it to build qi and blood, and that's what they're talking about here. That we use qi, that it comes from our food to help build blood, to make blood, according to Chinese medicine. Which sounds a little bit esoteric, but if you think about, we build blood from what we eat, and that's all we're really talking about. We're just putting a little bit of a different spin on it. Dongui decoction to tonify the blood is used for acute blood loss, while restore the spleen decoction is better for chronic conditions accompanied by signs of spleen vacuity. So those two are looking at the spleen and stomach and its function in building the blood, one acutely, one chronically. For substance decoction, focuses on the liver and on the governing and conception vessels. It aims to tonify the blood in its role as an essence rather than the functions that produce and manage it. That's a quote, again, from Scheid. So a little bit different than the others. sort of thing. So if you do have spleen vacuity, spleen qi deficiency, then Restore the Spleen decoction is a fantastic formula. Guayapitang is a fantastic formula. And if you have acute blood loss, well, depending on how bad it is, you might want to go to the emergency room. But after that, using Dongui decoction to tonify the blood might be a very good choice. While four substance decoction can still fit in there as a possible choice, depending on what's going on. Biomedical indications. So primarily used in conditions related to obstetrics and gynecology, such as irregular menstruation, primary dysmenorrhea, so that's painful menstruation, irregular menstruation, threatened miscarriage, postpartum weakness, and insufficient lactation. So this can be used in that case. Additionally, they state it can be used for anemia of various etiologies, urticaria, which is hives, so an allergic reaction, plantar warts, so those are warts on the bottom of your foot or on your foot, allergic purpura, so this is allergies causing little purple spots, and neurogenic headache, so a headache that comes from nerve issues. So migraines are generally in the category of neurogenic headaches. Chen adds that this formula is hematopoietic, which means it helps build blood. Okay, well, that's the function of the formula. Antiplatelet, so it actually helps move blood. So platelets are what are used for clotting, and when we have a cut or when we have it, and when we do antiplatelets, it means we often say they're blood movers. That's a really bad characterization of antiplatelets, but what it does mean is it doesn't clot as easily. It's radioprotective, so if someone's having radiotherapy, which is radiation therapy, then it can help protect against some of the negative effects of it. It aids cognition, thought processes. It is an antioxidant. It aids the cardiovascular system. It's antipyretic, which means that it helps itching. It's anti-inflammatory, so it helps prevent inflammation, and anti-tumor, so it could be used for cancers and other things that might be tumor forming. So let's talk about the science behind this. Like I said, this is a very popular formula, and there were quite a few animal, bench, and small clinical studies of this formula, even larger clinical studies of this formula. Part of the issue was a lot of them had modifications, so they weren't pure Si Wu Tang. And generally when there's a lot of those kind of studies, I start going, okay, well, where are the systematic reviews of these studies? So that systematic reviews, remember, are much stronger evidence than any individual study. So I looked for systematic reviews in this, and I only found really one, but it was a common modification of this formula, but not the formula itself. I didn't find any that were the formula specifically. And just, so you know a little bit about how I do that, I will look specifically at the Cochrane database of systematic reviews, which is a really useful tool that has a very clarified and specific way to do systematic reviews, which is very strong and very well respected. And I also do a Google Scholar search, which may not be as respected as some other types of searches, but it's easy for me to do and gives me lots of information. I usually go quite deep into that looking for systematic reviews, and that was my search terms, was systematic review, Si Wu Tang. So I might have missed something there, but I didn't see anything major. The studies were all quite positive, though I didn't get quite deep into them at this point. So because I was looking for those systematic reviews, that's generally the evidence I look for. Chen in their book, 2009, lists several human trials showing positive results in the following conditions. The most of these are from older Chinese studies, difficult to obtain. So I wasn't able to look into them, and they were individual studies, but they're all here in one presentation. I kind of liked it. I list them, like for example, the first one here is menstrual pain, and then I say N equals 57 behind that. So that means the number of subjects was 57. Again, remember anything above about 30 to 40 subjects are what we need to be statistically valid and be able to apply statistics to a set of results. So we want it to be over 30 to 40. And the higher they go, the better they go. So, modern day, you're looking for a really strong study. You're talking many hundreds or even thousands of subjects on a strong study. So most of these are considered pretty small. Some of them are in the hundreds, not bad, but it's important. It's not the only factor to judge a study on, by no means, but it's a good initial factor to look at is how many subjects a study has. So helpful in menstrual pain with 57 subjects, helpful for regular menstruation, 180 subjects, helpful for breech presentation, 80 subjects, endometriosis, 51 subjects, infertility, only 27 subjects, so that would not be considered statistically valid. Pelvic inflammatory disease, 89 subjects. Insomnia, only 10 subjects, so I wouldn't be putting a whole bunch there. Chronic nephritis, only 2 subjects. This was actually a case study, not a clinical study, so it only talked about 2. Chronic nephritis is a kidney infection, not necessarily what we'd first consider for this formula, so makes sense. Lumbago or low back pain, 135 subjects. Sciatica, which is pain with the scientific nerve, a pinch of the sciatica nerve in the low back, and the subjects were 112. Periarthritis of the shoulder, so that's arthritis around the shoulder, 215. So a lot of subjects on that one, which is not something I would think of as being a top thing to look at for this formula. So that's interesting. And the neurogenic headaches, there were actually 2 studies that they mentioned, one with 44 subjects and one with 24 subjects. So those were both like barely, the first one was, just a little bit above scientifically valid, and the second one was not. I'd love to see more, we can join those 2 in a systematic review and look at what else is going on. Again, these are from Chen and Chen. They tend to be Chinese studies and not very easy to see in English, but it gives us some. I would be very skeptical. They're older too, like some of these were from the 80s, so I'd be very skeptical with these results, but at least they're pointing in a direction for maybe further research. So let's talk a little bit about drug-herb interactions. Several herbs are at increased risk of drug-herb interactions. Again, these are very commonly used herbs in Chinese medicine, very powerful herbs in Chinese medicine. So there tends to be a lot more research on them. So we do pull out some of these interactions more than we might with some of our more obscure herbs. And so Dongui inhibits cytochrome P450, 1A2, and 3A4. So cytochrome P450 is a target of drug-herb interactions, and 3A4 is the most common one. So the fact that it inhibits 3A4 is significant. About 60% of drugs will use cytochrome P450, 3A4 for some form of metabolism as it goes through the body. So that is an issue. It also inhibits P-glycoprotein, which is another target of drug-herb interactions. Not as well established as cytochrome P450, but still quite important. And so we need to keep in mind that. So there's quite a bit of potential interactions here. It also has numerous D-level or lowest level evidence against its use with anticoagulants and antiplatelet medications, which is backed up by one case study, which level D evidence is not in humans, may or may not have a bearing on humans. Level C is case studies is small, is at least in a clinical study, it's a human study, but very small, very, not necessarily indicative of a broader thing. So there's all these potential issues around anticoagulant and antiplatelet medications, but nothing super well established. There's also some concern about phytoestrogenic effects with Dongui, though this is not currently supported by the level B evidence that I've looked at. So a lot of people are worried that Dongui will have estrogenic effects, effects like estrogen, basically. The research that I've seen does not support that. I've done a paper on it. I'm not a huge fan of this and phytoestrogenic effects. But that doesn't stop people from still thinking that it's there. Shu Diwang induces cytochrome P453 first. So this induces it while Dongui inhibits it. So the question becomes, do they do opposite things? And does that basically wipe out in the formula a big effect on 3A4? I don't know. Possible. Additionally, a level B study showed increased adverse effects when combining several individual herbs, including Shen Diwang, with the antipsychotics clozapine, quetiapine, and olanzapine. So, be careful with antipsychotics and Shu Wang. So, Bai Xiao also has numerous D-level evidence against its use with anticoagulants, antiplatelet, and antiglycemic medications, so anti-diabetic medications. It may increase the sedative effects of drugs. Again, all that evidence is very low evidence. I'd take it into account, but I wouldn't think of it very strongly. And Trongshan has the similar D-level evidence about anticoagulant and antiplatelet medication. So the bottom line here with the drug-herb interactions is that we should be a little bit cautious when combining Si Wu Tang with antiplatelet and anticoagulant drugs, which, at first you might think, well, how often is that going to occur? But a lot of the people who are on those drugs could potentially be considered blood deficient in a Chinese perspective. So we do want to keep this in mind as we're going forward with some of these drug-herb interactions. Again, it's low-level evidence, but it's kind of consistent between all of the substances here. And a lot of the anticoagulants, the big anticoagulant is warfarin, which has a lot of drug-herb interaction potential, and so I wouldn't be combining herbs with that anyways. So anyways, yeah, to be a bit cautious. The anticoagulant and antiplatelet medications tend to have more potential drug-herb interactions than other drugs. So that alone might prevent drugs. And the fact that these herbs might have some effects along those lines is even stronger, like let's not combine them. All right. So what are some concerns about this formula? This formula should not be used in treating acute, severe blood loss or other problems of blood deficiency characterized by severe weakness and labored breathing. Due to the cloying nature of its main ingredients, the formula is inappropriate for treating patterns characterized by an overabundance of dampness. So dampness, again, is a very technical Chinese term with abdominal fullness. So an overabundance of dampness with abdominal fullness, poor appetite, and loose stools. In other words, I mean, we can kind of characterize this, in lay terms, like these are difficult to digest. So if you're not able to digest food well, then don't take these or this formula. And that's basically what we're talking about without all the technical language around it. Chen add a couple more cautions. Because of the stagnating nature of Shu Wang, this formula should be used with caution in patients with vacuity of the spleen and stomach. So that's very similar, just kind of different wording of what we just said from Scheid. This formula is not suitable for patients with blood or qi collapse. So, what we're talking about here is blood vacuity or deficiency. Collapse is a very strong term in Chinese medicine, and that means the body is close to dying when the blood or the qi collapses. And basically what they're saying is there's not even enough oomph in the body at that point to assimilate these herbs, and they're just not going to be effective. They're going to be too cloying and can actually contribute to more of the collapse. So you don't want to do that. Take those in that situation. And it should be used cautiously during pregnancy. So remember, a lot of these things we're right around the obstetric and gynecological aspects of it. So it's not saying you can't use it during pregnancy. You just want to make sure you're doing it well, that the diagnosis is correct, and that you're monitoring it very closely during pregnancy. So it's not a contraindication, it's just a caution. And so you definitely want to keep that in mind in that patient population. All right, and that's it. We've covered it all. Thank you very much. Appreciate you hanging in there. Just a few things here. If you wouldn't mind, when you buy from Amazon, please use the banner ad on our homepage. We get a few pennies. I haven't seen anything in months. So if you go to sperb.com, you'll see the banner ad there. And hopefully that'll help me continue to do this going into the future. If you did like this podcast, please do us a favor. Give us a 5-star rating in your favorite podcast app. We would appreciate it, and thank you very much for considering that. That helps us get ahead and have other people discover this, so appreciate it if you would do that. And as always, you can get in touch with me at drgreg@sperbsherbs.com. So that's DRGREG at SPERBSHERBS.com. or at our website, www.sperbsherbs.com. And as always, we have an extensive bibliography, which I am going to update because I realized a few things were missing as we were going through the thing. And that's it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Sperb Herbs.
The proceeding was presented by Dr. Greg Sperber. We would like to thank Janelle for all her support and everybody else who contributed to this program.
Janelle.
Timothy
Thompson.
Dobbins.
Rogers. Campbell.